Welcome, welcome, friends. Welcome, scholars, teachers. This is the Empowering Students panel. We have two speakers today, both professors in the Department of English. We have 55 minutes, or now maybe 50, so we can go at a leisurely pace, and where we'll hold Q&A until the end, until after the papers are done. My name is Nancy Derbyshire. I'm also in the Department of English, and our first speaker today is Professor Chris Vincenhaler. Chris is an assistant professor of English at BMCC. She has worked as an arts in education consultant in Mississippi's public schools before earning her doctorate in medieval studies at the University of Iowa. She is the recipient of multiple teaching awards, the Leon Golden Teaching Award at Florida State, the J.R. Irwin Teaching Award at the University of Iowa, and recently the Distinguished Teaching Award at BMCC. So Chris, we are looking forward to hearing you share.
Okay, thanks for that, Nancy. And I will tell you this, I'm passionate about teaching, and my background as a public school teacher, I think really gave me some special insights about the challenges, especially of teaching at BMCC, but also of teaching at community colleges, because of course, you know, the fact of the matter is we have many students who really don't know how to be students. And what I believe is that the first priority is actually to get them there and to really inculcate academic mindsets and professional mindsets. And what I'm going to do is share with you just a few strategies about how I do that. And to some extent, I want to frame this by saying that my goal when I teach 101 is to prepare students for college. And of course, college is a place where what we hope is that students come to class, that they're volunteering, that they are in fact acting as adults. But for me, 101 is more like Paris Island. I've been called, I'm 50% drill sergeant and 50% Peter Pan. And I will admit that the task of really pushing students to come up to this level of professional and academic mindsets really does require enormous strategic approaches. But I wouldn't be presenting today except that I feel that I have had a measure of the success, and I appreciate your interest. So very quickly, I'm going to show let's see, now I'm looking for it. I think it's this one. Yes, indeed it is. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen, and it should show view slideshow. It should say empowering mindsets, empowering students. Are we seeing that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So guys, get ready for bullet point hell, because I'm just going to bullet point you to death. Because I have some big concepts here. Now, there's been research on academic mindsets. It's a buzzword. But I would honestly say that really taking seriously these categories is absolutely essential if we're going to teach students how to be students. If, for the sake of argument, you agree that that actually is priority number one, especially for gateway courses, then the first priority is to make students feel a sense of belonging. And that involves, in my case, explicit expressions of caring, of respect, of admiration, explicit times for students to connect with each other, explicit conversations about the struggles of college and so on. Like, it is part of the project. And I mean, during the online, even during COVID, I would even say, really goofy things like, everyone put your hand here and give yourselves a hug for me. And I would just absolutely pour on the positive and the, you're awesome, in ways that I never really had done in live classrooms. But I found that my students really needed that. And it changed me. The COVID experience changed me as again, I was like, our students almost can't get too much of a sense of belonging. A second thing is growth mindset. My students walk in the door and I say, get ready to make mistakes. And they're like, what? I said, everyone here is going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. And I teach them Nelson Mandela's wonderful mantra about mistakes. I never lose. I either win or learn from my mistakes. And I tell them that the goal is to give the best, you'll meet the test, and to make the most of your mistakes. So we really, really focus on a growth mindset and on risk taking and on the necessity and the inevitability of making mistakes as part of our experience of human freedom. But I won't go into the long lecture about that. Agency, a sense that you can do this. And I actually give my students a guarantee. I basically say, look, if you come to at least 10 out of the 13 preparation classes, the last 2 classes of the semester I consider to be essentially preparation for exam prep, but where I am teaching concepts, you come and participate in at least 10 of those workshops. And I just learned with BMCC, I have to go to that number. You hand in most of your projects on time. And I do give students a policy for requesting an extension. They are able to ask for up to 2 extensions with no penalties. And after that, there are some grade penalties, but they must ask before the deadline. So I basically say, you come to the workshops and you submit your work on time and you get all of your work, completed according to the instructions. I can guarantee you that you will pass the course in 101. And students are like, really? And I say, yeah, if I need to give you extra tutoring, if you need to take if there's something that's not satisfactory, I will get you there. I will get you there, but you have got to do your part. So the goal there is to establish very clear, this is your part and this is my part. I also give an award for leadership in my semester this year for students who've really gone above and beyond, and really recognizing student leadership. They get a little certificate and a round of applause. And I say, when I write your letter of recommendation, I'm going to tell the people I recommend that you earned a leadership award, because I want to emphasize their agency, their capacity. And last but not least, that this course that they're taking is highly meaningful to them personally. Now, everyone, one of the curses of being a teacher is that often our experiences are very radically different from that of our students. I know when I worked with K through 12 schools, I said to teachers, our students think we're God. Now, professors, that's not the case. Students know we're human. But, a third grader sees their elementary school teacher in the grocery store and they come up, you buy cat food, because their student perceptions of teachers are extraordinary. We have extraordinary power, but we also have extraordinary blind spots. And for those of us who went to college in more or less privileged environments, which is to say, not the environments that our BMCC students face. I didn't have to work a 40-hour week. I didn't have to slog across the city. I didn't have to take care of a child or an adult. And, we go on about our students. But I have to understand their lives. And if I don't understand what they need, and if I don't respect it, how can I possibly hope to optimize their performance? So my first job is simply to recognize this. For our students at BMCC, for most of our students, college is not the smorgasbord of the mind. It is a transit system. It is a transit system to go from a dead end to a future. That's their goal. Their goal is to get out of the hellhole that many of them are in and have the lives that we have the privilege of living. So when I teach 101, I absolutely aim to their aspirations. I don't mind talking about their aspiration for a professional future and honoring it 100,000%, because it's real for them. And my hope is that by enabling them to learn how to be students and how to deal with all of the challenges they have to face, that then they can go take a course with Dr. Derbyshire or Dr. Hart or Dr. Vasconcelos, and so on, and enjoy the smorgasbord of the mind and enter a conversation that it has depth and richness and a deeply, deeply humanistic and critical understanding of the world we live in. But as a gateway course, as an entry course for our most challenged students, I have found to address their aspirations. And I promise them on the syllabus, this will be the most rewarding course you will ever take, because I will prepare you for success in college, career, and beyond. And I mean that commitment. I have no apologies for really focusing on training as a priority for my gateway students. Now, in addition to academic mindsets, another thing that I really focus on is professional mindsets. The reality is that we're teaching grade 13 in many cases, but for that very reason, it's very important, I think, to unhinge student expectations that this is grade 13, and this is going to be just like what they went through in high school, which often was a counterproductive experience. I want them mentally and in every way possible to seize on their start anywhere, start here, go anywhere. And then my motto is start now, start now. And I explained to them that we are a professional community of practice. And what that means is I expect them to have proactive accountability. For example, if they contact me after a deadline, it's too late. All right, this is one example. And I give them I give them contacts with my through my cell phone. I've got the app now, but they can contact me anytime, and they are responsible to. If they don't know what to do, they're responsible, and I hear from them all the time. But that's their proactive professional accountability. Another aspect of this professional mindsets is I actually help them with time management. I teach them time management. They read the BMCC. It's 6 hours a week outside of the course. And guys, they do 6 hours a week. I don't have time to show you my Blackboard. Well, I think I will, because I think you should see what my students actually do in a week. Here, this is just their projects. They submit a draft every single week for my critical review, and they submit projects where they have answered questions or watched video lectures and so on. It is 6 hours, and you'll notice that I have it divided up so that they are responsible for 2 deadlines a week. And the point here is that the time management, as those of us who've taught at BMCC know, our students absolutely struggle with keeping up with everything they have to do. And so breaking things down, absolutely holding them accountable is so essential. And they actually read some articles on time management. Like, we're learning how to do things, how for them to survive and perform at their highest ability. Strategic self-awareness. In my 101 class, they write papers on topics that pertain to their performance. Avoiding fast food, getting enough sleep, not sitting too long, because students and all of us sit too long, and it's very bad for our bodies and for our cognition. Not multitasking. So they actually write papers on these topics, because and getting enough sleep. These topics have everything to do, again, with their aspirations, their performance, and their challenge. And so becoming self-aware and thinking about optimizing performance. I also do a couple of lectures on using positive mindsets, and at the same time accounting for negative realities. All right. Positive mindsets, negative realities. What we don't want is positive mindsets that whitewash negative realities, but we also want to recognize that we have three modes of freedom in our world. We don't get to choose where we're born. We don't get to choose whether we get leukemia next week. We have three modes of freedom. What we're going to focus on, how we're going to interpret it, and how we're going to respond to it. Now, this very important insight about our freedom in life, in spite of all of the boundaries and all of the obstacles, what to focus on, how to respond, how to interpret, and how to respond. So this strategic self-awareness is absolutely essential for students to actually become empowered and recognize that in spite of all the obstacles, they have every day an opportunity. To quote again the great Nelson Mandela, I never lose. I either win or learn. And many of my students have really benefited from this emphasis. Last but not least is them recognizing their leadership. Students who start to show facility in the content area of the course actually have opportunities to tutor students. And of course, they also become eligible for me to bring them on as my SI leader going forward. So now that's the emphasis, but I just also want to break down a few strategies that I use. Number one, establishing safe space for risk taking. They get credit for volunteering to speak up, okay? And they get credit if they spoke up and they asked a question. They get credit if they spoke up and it was the stinking dog wrong answer. And they get credit if they spoke up and it was brilliant. And they get credit if they spoke up and it was the right answer. It doesn't matter what they say. If they speak up, they get credit. And we talk about how all contributions are valuable. And many times, especially in my live class, there would be not a day going that people have not spoken up in front of the whole group. Obviously, this is a huge part of building confidence, especially for students who English second language has really created traumatic experiences. I, of course, honor student aspirations and priorities, but I also want to say I reward improvement. I reward improvement, which is to say every draft students submit as we build their paper, every draft they submit, I count it, it's points, it's always points. But if their final paper, if the paper that they ultimately submit, based on the feedback that they've received paragraph by paragraph, if they achieve in the A level, they earn 10 bonus points. I'm like, great. If you started out behind and you ended up with an excellent paper, look at what you've learned. Okay. Now, of course, it's week by week, like paragraph one of the 7 paragraph paper gets started week 1. We take it week by week by week. They get very specific feedback on each paragraph. And then if by the end they have an excellent paper, then I'm like, great, I am rewarding your improvement. And I use bonus points absolutely to make up the difference between when you start out and you're not earning so high and you end up with a good grade. That I want to make explicit is the name of the game. And I'm just about to run out of time here, so I will very quickly wrap it up. One last thing I do is emphasize a professional community of practice. As I said earlier, start here, go anywhere, start now. Aiming the Gateway course to their professional aspirations. We talk about the 5 C's, which Thomas Friedman identified as the attributes that employers are looking for 21st century professionals: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and confidence. And we explicitly talk about and work to develop these skills. I use their last names as a sign of respect in 101. My students quickly learn you can use a last name and still have a warm and supportive relationship. I say, this is your professional future. You will call me Professor Vincent Healer. I will call you Mr. Smith or Mr. Jackson or Miss Jones. Last names I have found up their mentality for professional mindsets and performance. And of course, I establish professional protocols, and I also reframe. Instead of calling it a class, I say it's our professional workshop. Instead of calling it assignments, I say this is our projects. Instead of saying your classmates, I use peers and colleagues. Instead of saying I'm your teacher, I'm like, I'm your mentor. And I'm keeping it positive, but I'm also absolutely emphasizing you are in the big time now, and your professional future begins here. So that's the bullet point presentation, and thank you for your attention. And I turn it back over to Professor Derbyshire.
Thank you, Professor Vincent Haler. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your practice with us. I will move on to our next speaker, Dr. Maria do Carmo Eggers de Vasconcelos was born in Lisbon, Portugal, and lived and taught all over the world. She holds a PhD and a master's in philosophy and English from the CUNY Graduate Center, a certification in women's studies also from the Grad Center. And she completed a year-long seminar on race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious sensibilities at Hunter College. And later, she guided along with Professor Susanna Powell at the Teaching Learning Center at BMCC. So she used that work to benefit us at BMCC. She's also participated in the conflict resolution seminars at John Jay College and the year-long provost seminar on myths and literature for modern poetry at the Graduate Center, as well as the seminar on publishing, also reproduced at BMCC by invitation of Dean Michael Gillespie. Professor de Vasconcelos also belonged to one of the first cohorts to teach online under the auspices of the Title V grant and created the first CUNY online course on modern poetry, which was adopted by four-year colleges. I did not know that. In addition, Dr. de Vasconcelos also holds a license in English and German philology and pedagogy from the Classic University of Lisbon, plus also postgraduate studies in British and American culture and literature. Moreover, she holds a BA in film studies and film direction and production from the Lisbon Conservatory. A true polymath. She is against any condescending positions which do not elicit the best from our students. Her guidance of 70 honors projects proves the commitment to excellence at BMCC. Thank you. I look forward to your talk, Dr. de Vasconcelos.
Thank you, Nancy. First of all, thank you, Chris. It is brilliant. Your method is brilliant. And what it reveals immediately is so much work, so much devotion to our students and to their well-being and success. It's moving. Thank you very much. After that long introduction, I'm going to read the paper, and it is a very simple one. So it's a contrast. Anyway, the experience that I relate in this paper that I'm going to read, it was to relate my very private experience of COVID. At the time that I continued teaching online, it was immediately when we moved to teaching online. And it was completely a new forest, and now I didn't know if I could do it because I was so extremely sick, and how I was going to handle my own perception of my own mortality. Anyway, so I come with this paper. It's a little simplistic, but maybe afterwards we can talk about the presuppositions, etc. It might take 25 minutes to read it, and I will go from my private story to the work in the classroom, and at the end I will read a few, probably 4 brief passages from the students' work. As you know, all of us that have been teaching, we think we invented the wheel, we revisit the wheel, sometimes we are on the top, sometimes we are down, sometimes it's one thing, another thing, but I feel that all of us have learned that a lot of our teaching, a lot of our pedagogy, always in process, it's determined so much by the class that it's in front of us as well. Generally, I ask my students to write with me now on the share screen. Sometimes they write a project together, but this is their private work, their individual work. And I think it responded well to the crisis that we were experiencing. So let me begin by reading. Generally, instructors at BMCC wish to honor and advocate for the recognition of students' intelligence, candor, dignity, and ethics, while promoting their success. We try to lead them to variegated creative endeavors and intellectual discourses, which also involve oppressive topics, while addressing the basic problems of their being part of a productive group in a classroom, developing academic work habits, and becoming aware of literary concepts, grammar, and effective writing. We teachers, as we all know, have a complex function. And when 2 years ago, the COVID crisis fell upon us, no one of us was prepared to deal with that uncontrollable disease and that enormity loss. And I did not deal with it in the classroom directly. In contrast, I chose to be a bit more caring, a bit more tolerant, continuing to incorporate the same syllabus while emphasizing as much as I could instruction that was slower, repetitive, simple, incremental, clear, organized, and still rich in content, scope, and purpose. I sought in the crisis context more narrative forms that at the beginning of the semester would possibly be the easiest but more effective mode to adopt. Themes of oppression related to neoliberal politics represented in students' lives could be, in my mind, analogically connected to illness, disease as a form of oppression. Many websites emphatically encourage readers to understand the difference between illness and disease. The medical writers believe that both terms are interchanged carelessly in many conversations. They had understanding the difference between illness and disease is a matter of being educated about the nature of both. Under this light, coronavirus is defined as an infectious disease caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. After reading this explanation, I thought to myself, yes, COVID is a disease, but certainly all of us expected it to end. Therefore, I feel COVID is also an illness. People who got sick with this virus thought that when they would be cured, that it was the end of the suffering and end of the narrative. No one thought that the long-term effects would last without the patients having any idea of their liberation. It is my present predicament. In this context, I began to think of COVID as a form of continued oppression, like the various personal and societal oppressions that our students suffer. I got it immediate when our instruction moved from face-to-face in the classroom to online. Indeed, first I sought to alter the syllabus by including topics related to illness. I thought that maybe they would be closer to the students and write on the current tragic mode. However, I felt unprepared and too close to the crisis to do so. In addition, I thought to myself, whatever will happen in the Zoom classes, I will adjust to it. It is interesting to notice that students did not bring the crisis, its tragic and painful issues or themes to discussion into our Zoom classes. It was the time of the escalation of the COVID crisis, but students preferred to email me on their experiences with the virus. I believe this was the result of their shock, being lost, suddenly experiencing a heavy cloud upon all of them, as well as their desire for individual quiet mourning and extended privacy. Their sense of privacy was partly how they coped, and it was like mine too. This secretive mutual behavior and mode derived from all of us, really sensing that we were facing our human lot, our mortality. In my classrooms, I noticed that more solemnity was developed in our dealings. It proved to be very productive in the Zoom classes. The difference among COVID and other illnesses is that the new virus did not bring shame to the patients. But shame as presented by the controversial treatment of Jean-Paul Sartre in Being and Nothingness is often shared with the students, since shame in its physical and social vulnerability is one of their cherished themes. In Illness as Metaphor, the 1978 work of critical theory by Susan Sontag, she approaches that topic of shame. She challenged the victim blaming in the language that is often used to describe diseases and the people affected by them. Sontag denounced the slogan that TB and cancer were popularly associated with personal psychological traits. In particular, she said that the metaphors and terms used to describe both syndromes led to an association between the repressed passion and the physical disease itself. She wrote about the peculiar reverse that with the modern diseases, the romantic idea that the disease expresses the character is invariably extended to assert that the character causes the disease because it has not expressed itself. Sontag said that the clearest and most truthful way of thinking about diseases is without recourse to metaphor. She believed that wrapping disease in metaphors discouraged, silenced, and shamed patients. Critics have disagreed with her, saying that metaphors and other symbolic language help some affected people form meaning out of their experiences. But the serious awareness of victim blaming transformed that book into Sontag's most famous and best-selling work. I personally have not felt shame, but understand victim blaming. I felt my attempt at finding the ideal environment during a period of extended and obscurantist crisis led me to protect my students from the burden of sharing my disease and my vulnerability. I never shared that I was extremely sick with my students until the last day of classes. COVID created, however, this strange absence of divulging my entirety as far as I was experiencing my malaise. My predicament altered my pedagogy at the time. I am one who believes in integrity in pedagogy, and introductions and personal narratives, despite possible distortions by the confession, yet complex I and the memory, are positive revelations of one's attempt at wholeness. I believe in personal narratives to introduce myself, compose the syllabus, and to unfold the sequence of assignments. But our COVID crisis came too fast, and there was not and has not yet been enough distance to examine the entire crisis. Generally, also our students share my love for personal narratives when the setting is appropriate. This is up to the teacher and to the chemistry of each class. Of course, students' responsible, kind behavior, their work, contributions are also important to creating an optimal classroom milieu. This seems even more so in times of crisis and trauma. The events mentioned earlier surfaced in my Good English 101 and 100.5 classes. The past semester, I experimented again with grading. At the traditional grading, one of my students and then the entire class requested it. And the more intertwined syllabus dancing between the personal voice and the hybrid, and finally the traditional third or first personal plural academic voice was established. Creativity also emphasized in warm-up exercises and assignments. Most of the results were positive, with 3 serious limitations. One difficulty was students had difficulty in understanding the difference between generalizations and definitions. Another was the slow pace of some students in doing their work for the course. And probably the most perturbing one for us, and we all know this, but it's always perturbing, is when a few students prove not to have the skills to deal with work required, even for the apparently easier subjective voice as well. As we know, the private voice is very important for many, many reasons, including resistance to so many oppressions, and fortunately, it might diminish plagiarism. Student writing showing the successful movement between the narrative subjective to the hybrid, mixing of both, and to more objective voice has been beautifully achieved. Iconic pedagogues like Paulo Freire teach us that the fundamental nature of education is to be narrative, which seems to invite COVID scripts for good storytelling to begin. As we know, like quilting, sewing, knitting, mask creating, the pub happy hours, the oral tradition all over the world, and the tradition in Africa, particularly, storytelling is also a form of resistance against our existence and against our oppression. My own oppressive personal introduction seems to reveal that without effort, A comfortable, safe environment is established or imagined and allows students to present their personal introductions, their first exercise of the semester. It's interesting to notice that they present their experiences spontaneously, molding on the teacher's candid openness and existential adventures. What students perceive as my otherness allows them to be freer and therefore more creative. But in these introductions, there are subtle guidelines. A certain form of structure accentuated more during the time of crisis for the work to be completed, which I really believe is fundamental in a chaotic time. It makes me share with my students the explanation of T.S. Eliot, that he only needed the objective correlative because he had too many emotions that he did not how to control. This intellectual allusion and the personal experience of the teacher in its openness seems real an open door to the comfort zone in which issues of identity formation, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, faith are expressed and throughout the course encouraged to be conveyed in better expressions in relation to students' initial writing, trying to find le mot juste. My brief allusions to my family life and other private personal elements associate well with the situation of women and our students, which echoes still so many stages of oppression and contradictions of women's roles and aspirations. Private symbolical incidents, a la mode of the iconic stove in Sylvia Plath's life, one mark of domestic life and women's destiny, metamorphose the very personal, almost anecdotal at times, into socio-political statements. There is room for those who for a while distance themselves from the texture of the class, often to better understand the nature, goals of the course, and in the process, their own identity, their various stages of development, and even their shame mentioned earlier. Personal shame and healing, pervading private narratives, brought students to write about sociopolitics issues resulting from neoliberal ideologies. Other complex I voices are at times just confessional and traumatic, such as that telling of the mother who encouraged one brilliant young student who was raped as a child several times by an uncle to prostitute herself and defended the action of the uncle, or another let live in a household in which the mother worked almost 24 hours a day and the father was always drunk. These narratives, connoting so many similar ones in the classroom, are respected, acknowledged, expanded and refined by research on re-evaluating the initial stances. For instance, by Luna Dolezal's reconsideration of Sartre's account of shame and Noel Panicella's approach to shame and guilt in Sartre the Flies. This route from the private to academic research allowed the class to refine its personal experiences and perceptions of them, and this was applied to the close reading of the novella Monique and so many other classic texts. Despite the representations in those works of various races and social classes, all voices are suppressed. The theme of intersectionality is still depicted in a romantic manner. The resolution to that silence is expanding into larger silence, either death, madness, disappearance, or total isolation. Suffering and trauma connect well to students' oppressions and to the disease illness that ruins one's quality of life and even one's voice. Students are finding their voices. They love stories, and one of their favorite dialogues is books 1 and 7 of Plato's Republic. The allegory of the cave is a real delight for our students. They recognize in its content the obstacles of habits, fears, illusions, as well as the possible value or not of education, and its component of liberation against oppressive forces, include our shame. In my attempt at escalating writing opportunities, first by making students become aware of their own voices and rejoice in them, then even starting a healing process, I ask them for a personal letter addressed to whom they wish dealing with any oppressive situation in their lives. And then they also must ask for accountability from the other. Then, for example, the conversation in class is about the value of family, traditional nuclear family, education, production of knowledge, etc. Instead of asking for a paper on one of the concepts of Plato's frames, sometimes I ask students to imaginatively place themselves in Plato's time, acknowledging his, their mode of life, Plato's golden rule for happiness, the values of friendship, the value of justice, etc. Later, they are supposed to write a personal letter or Facebook message to Plato, informing him what they liked about his philosophical system and writings, and which they didn't like, or understand or find comparison contrast to their own present lives and other pieces of literature, and even encouraging Plato to think differently about some subjects. All this can be very funny. I call this writing hybrid because it is obvious, not personal, but it's not completely academic. Interestingly, most students like the Platonic world, the Platonic system, because they feel that our times lack values and ethics, and many political actions are indeed shameful. I'm going to read to you a brief section from a student's personal letter to his mother, and the work from the same student from the private to the attempt at more objective academic work. So this semester, I am doing the same, but the private, the previous semesters, each student chose one topic, the books that he or they wanted to deal with. And it was from the private declaration about whatever they want about their lives to the private letter, and then to research, then reviewing the letter, and then a list of topics in their lives and the research to be expanded, then a letter, in this case to Plato, and then a comparison of the Plato's world with another world in another piece of literature, and afterwards an attempt at academic writing. This student was a good student. There were several. I had a very good one-on-one class last semester. So each one dealt with different topics on the same. Most of them chose Plato's The Allegory of the Cave. So this one, the pieces are very beautiful, but because of time, I just chose what shows exactly the movement from the personal to the various phases. So, dear mother, I woke up today and had a dream about you crying. It felt so real, as it is an image. I have seen in person time and time again. One might say that crying is a sign of weaknesses. However, you are one of the strongest women I know. Knowing the things you have endured, and after reading the allegory of the cave today, I am writing to you to apologize to you for everything you were obliged to experience throughout your life. As a woman, as a Filipino immigrant living in the United States of America, and as a member of the lowest middle class, as well as a person who suffers from mental illness, a person who is married to a man who is also a Filipino immigrant, who is an alcoholic, and has suffered from various types of oppression himself, and as a mother to two first-generation Filipino-American boys who still are figuring out their place in the world to this day, and as a woman who has experienced sexual abuse in the workplace and is still working through the trauma, I address you with anger and with love. These recent, now ellipses, this recent anti-Asian sentiment that became widespread during the pandemic has been special tough on you. And I appreciate your constant checking in with me. Despite your love for me, your total absence during the long period of cancer of my brother made me absent to you too. That hurt, and I have felt oppressed by deep pain. Did you ever think about my oppressive suffering? So then the student, this is a male student, he researched on themes that later you would connect to his private letter. It shows in his life and in Plato's life, freedom, choice, autonomy, suffering, liberation, truth, construction of reality, idealism versus realism, self-reliance, wisdom, philosophy, existentialism, education versus experience, conditioning, good versus evil, self versus community, identity formation, governing, and obedience. So then he moves to the letter to Plato. And I'm just reading a little bit because it's very nice too. Dear philosopher Plato, how are you in your beautiful and historical city of Athens? How is education moving along in your famous academy? Do you think that your brilliant students influence the decisions of the Republic? Are they more virtuous, more just than their fellow citizens? I'm eager to hear from you. I'm writing you said that you know that I like book 1 and 7. However, I'm still puzzled by your instructive allegory. I understood the plot of the story, but I still have so many philosophical and existential questions. I feel that the allegory of the cave, you told the story of young men in a cave that were limited to a specific set of imagery. So he paraphrases the allegory. So then he goes, how did you come to understand the nature of man in this way? Your story reveals the very nature of humankind, the journey from the fear to liberation, the growth from oppression to happiness. This story was written long before our modern society. However, the themes are completely current. And so he continues, and I like this one. Needless to say, Plato, I am an atheist. I am so grateful that you chose to have the sun represent the two power, which is nature. Spirituality is different from religion, and I believe it can be powerful to believe in the spirit of Mother Earth. Nature is undeniable, and despite the parallels in the allegory of the cave to a lot of discord that is happening in our country and the world at large. There is optimism in your writing, even if not always too obvious. Then he moves to the the comparison contrast, he wrote another paper, all of them had to do it, to choose another book that we read in class, or an article, or an essay, or a poem, and to compare contrast with the allegory of the cave. So it shows the Sherman Alexis, the joy of reading and writing, and the allegory of the cave. And of course, for both, there is the symbolism of the cave, one in the Indian reservation and one in the classic times. And then the last one was the attempt, and this was written in the class. I was very happy. This was an attempt at more objective writing through all these escalating phases. So he says, this is called Plato and Education. The complicated dynamic between those in power and the working class is a tale that can be told generation after generation in every iteration of functioning societies. There is always some form of abuse of power by the ruling class and discontent and oppression within the lower classes. In the allegory of the cave, Plato uses a metaphor to express how education and enlightenment are paramount to ensuring that those in power are just in how they rule. In addition to emphasizing the importance of every man being as knowledgeable as possible of the world, and not just limited by the physical world that they are exposed to, I fully agree with Plato and believe that education is very important for the creation of a more just society. So he continues, and anyway, so this is the mode of writing of the student, and it is the last exercise. So my conclusion is, despite the successful classes, a few students fell behind, and this makes me think probably of diminishing the amount of work, still a little more in a time of deep social crisis. However, the very structured course, clear delineate, seems a positive element that students liked and acknowledged. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. And I am open to every question that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor de Vasconcelos. I'm sorry to say we're 5 minutes over our panel time. I hope that didn't bother anybody, but I thought it was important to hear the full paper.
Thank you, Nancy, thank you. And I just want to say one thing to you. When you said you want to learn the word in Portuguese, the degree between master's and PhD is called licenciatura. Licenciatura, yeah.
Licenciatura.
License.
Shall we take a few minutes for quick questions?
Are we able to?
We are over time. I know there's closing remarks.
I think closing remarks are right now. So I'm
Okay,
thinking,
then maybe I should end the meeting. Yeah.
But if there is any question, an important question from the audience,
Maybe you can bring them up on the chat in the closing remarks panel. That way folks can shoot over to there. Thank you, ladies, for sharing your
Thank you.
pedagogy with
Nancy.
us.